At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon on February 26, 1991, the desert stopped being a space the cavalry was moving through and became a battlefield closing around it. The 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment had pushed past the 70 easting limit of advance, through dust and artillery fire, into the main Iraqi defensive zone. Ahead, hidden in the storm and spread across shallow rises, revetments, bunkers, and vehicle positions, were elements of the Republican Guard's Tawakalna Division and the Iraqi 12th Armored Division. The place would be remembered by a map coordinate, 73 easting, a north-south grid line with no romance in the name. Yet on that invisible line, reconnaissance became battle, and a cavalry screen found itself in the center of one of the most important armored clashes of the late 20th century.
If you would like to move beyond the podcast, you can see my available books at militaryauthor.me. And at trackpads.com, you will find magazines and galleries with hundreds of thousands of photos and videos to explore. The weather made the arrival feel almost unreal. A shamal had blown dust across the battlefield until distance collapsed, and the horizon seemed to move closer with every gust. To the naked eye, the desert was brown haze, broken by the shapes of friendly vehicles, smoke, and the occasional shadow of something ahead. Through thermal sights, another world appeared. Hot engines, running vehicles, and hidden positions glowed against the cooler ground, giving American crews a chance to see what Iraqi crews could not see as well or as soon. But the storm still mattered. It made direction harder, friendly positions harder to judge, and every decision more urgent. The Americans had better tools for seeing, but they were still fighting inside a cloud. Eagle Troop, under Captain H.R. McMaster, struck into this world with the momentum it had carried from the earlier contacts around 68 Easting. The troop had already destroyed Iraqi positions and pushed through the outer security zone, but now the enemy was thicker, more organized, and more dangerous. Iraqi tanks sat in revetments, some angled to fire from prepared positions. Armored vehicles and bunkers were scattered across the troops' front. There were soldiers in trenches, vehicles trying to move, and enemy forces belonging to a defensive system that had not expected the Americans to arrive with such speed from the west. Eagle did not have the luxury of pausing to admire the size of the problem. It had found the defense by crashing into it. The fighting unfolded at the speed of trained crews doing violent work under pressure. An Abrams commander saw a heat signature, ordered the gun onto it, and the gunner fired before the target could answer. A Bradley crew identified a bunker, vehicle, or infantry position and added its own fire to the chaos. Platoons moved by bounds, keeping enough spacing to avoid bunching and enough cohesion to keep the troop from tearing apart in the dust. Targets appeared, vanished, and reappeared. Some Iraqi vehicles were destroyed in their revetments before their crews could bring effective fire to bear. Others tried to move, only to reveal themselves more clearly to thermal sights. The battle was not clean or cinematic. It was a series of fast recognitions, decisions, shots, corrections, and reports. What made the moment extraordinary was not simply that Eagle Troop was winning its own fight. It was that the 2nd D Armored Cavalry Regiment had discovered a seam between Iraqi formations, a dangerous and valuable gap where the boundaries of defensive responsibility did not hold neatly together. On one side were elements associated with the Republican Guard's Tawakalna Division. On the other were forces tied to the 12th Armored Division. In theory, such a junction could be covered by fire, reserves, and coordination. In practice, under air attack, poor communications, bad weather, and the shock of the coalition's western envelopment, seams could become wounds. The cavalry had struck not merely a line of tanks, but a weak place in an army's ability to hold itself together. This was where reconnaissance became something larger than reconnaissance. The regiment had been sent forward to screen, find, and report for 7th Corps, not to conduct the entire Corps battle alone. Yet for a time, the cavalry was the American force in closest contact with the Iraqi main defense, and the weight behind it had not yet fully arrived. That meant the regiment was, in a real tactical sense, exposed. It had powerful Abrams tanks, Bradleys, artillery support, and trained crews, but it was facing a broader Iraqi armored defense with more vehicles in the area than the cavalry itself possessed. Official accounts later emphasized that for a time, the regiment was one of the few American formations in the ground war that was clearly outnumbered and outgunned locally. The difference was that it was not outmatched in tempo.
Tempo is one of those military words that can sound bloodless until a battle gives it a pulse. At 73 Easting, tempo meant the Americans were forcing the Iraqis to experience the fight as a chain of surprises. American crews saw first, fired first, shifted first, and reported fast enough to keep the regiment moving as a connected force. Iraqi soldiers, many already worn down by weeks of bombing and days of uncertainty, were hit before they could assemble a coherent answer. Their tanks were often in strong positions individually, but the system around those positions was slow to react. A dug-in tank can be formidable if it fires at the right moment. If it is found, hit, or flanked before its crew understands the fight, its protection becomes a shallow grave of sand and steel.
Ghost Troop, Iron Troop, and other elements of the regiment were also drawn into the expanding battle. The fight was never only one famous troop moving alone through legend. Across the regimental front, American cavalry units encountered Iraqi vehicles, bunkers, artillery positions, and moving columns that suggested the enemy was trying to reposition or escape the trap closing around it. Each troop had its own fragment of the storm, its own radio traffic, its own sightings and sudden threats. To the soldiers inside the vehicles, the battle was not a single sweeping event. It was the world immediately visible through sight, hatch, periscope, and dust, connected to a larger fight only by radio reports and the knowledge that other American crews were somewhere out there doing the same work. Fire support helped keep the Iraqi defense from regaining balance. Artillery from the regiment and supporting units struck enemy positions, adding weight beyond what the tanks and Bradleys could deliver directly. Attack helicopters and other supporting arms also played roles in disrupting Iraqi artillery and armor as the battle developed. This is important because 73 Easting is often remembered as a tank fight, and it was certainly one of the clearest demonstrations of modern American armored gunnery. But tanks were not alone. They were part of a combined arms system in which artillery suppressed, aviation hunted, scouts reported, mechanics kept vehicles moving, logisticians fed the advance, and radios carried the picture from one troop to another. The cavalry's punch came from steel, but its staying power came from integration. The Iraqi soldiers caught in the fight were not simply targets in a training exercise. They were men inside a collapsing defensive arrangement, some trying to fight, some trying to move, some surrendering, and some dying before they could make sense of the enemy that had appeared through the dust. Many belonged to an army that had been placed in a nearly impossible position by Saddam Hussein's decision to seize Kuwait and then hold it against a coalition with air superiority and overwhelming logistical reach. That does not erase their danger to the Americans. Iraqi tanks and anti-tank weapons could still kill. Iraqi artillery could still frighten and wound. But it does remind us to treat the battle seriously. The violence at 73 Easting was not a contest of machines in a desert arena. It was human beings trapped inside the consequences of command decisions made far above them. As the battle widened, the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment did what cavalry is supposed to do at its highest level. It turned contact into opportunity. It found the enemy, fixed him, damaged him, and gave the corps behind it a clearer door into the Republican Guard fight. The 1st Infantry Division was moving up behind the regiment, preparing for the pass-through that would continue the attack into Objective Norfolk. That mattered because 73 Easting was not meant to be the final act. It was the violent hinge between the approach march and the deeper destruction of Iraqi armored forces. The cavalry's success gave 7th Corps the knowledge and space it needed to bring more weight into the fight. The screen had not merely protected the fist, it had opened the target. For all its tactical brilliance, the battle also contained the danger that follows success in fast armored war. When units move quickly, when visibility is poor, and when enemy and friendly vehicles occupy the same widening battlefield, control becomes fragile. The same aggression that keeps pressure on the enemy can carry units into uncertainty faster than higher headquarters can fully understand. The same thermal sights that reveal enemy vehicles can still leave crews struggling with identification in smoke, dust, and confusion. At 73 Easting, American training and command discipline largely held, but the campaign around it would also produce painful episodes of friendly fire and battlefield disorientation. Modern armored warfare can be devastatingly precise in one moment and frighteningly confused in the next. The battle's significance lies in how completely it displayed the mature form of late 20th century armored combat. This was not Cambrai, where tanks lumbered forward as fragile machines trying to cross trenches and wire. It was not a Second World War breakthrough built around radios, air support, and massed armor, but still limited by human sight and slower communications. At 73 Easting, sensors, thermal vision, stabilized guns, disciplined crews, mission command, artillery, aviation, and corps-level maneuver came together in a storm. The tank remained central, but it was no longer just a steel battering ram. It was part of a system that could see in darkness, strike through dust, and make decisions faster than a more rigid enemy could absorb. The result was not just destruction, it was paralysis imposed at speed. When the firing ebbed around 73 Easting, the battlefield had changed. The 2D Armored Cavalry Regiment had torn into Iraqi armored forces, exposed the weakness in the defensive seam, and proved that the Republican Guard line could be broken by aggressive reconnaissance backed by modern combined arms. But the battle did not end the war by itself, and that is part of why it matters. It was not a standalone legend of one troop or one tank type. It was the hinge of a larger campaign, the moment when 7 Corps' movement east became a confirmed collision with Iraq's armored defense. Behind the cavalry came the pass-through, Objective Norfolk, Medina Ridge, and the final collapse of organized resistance. 73 Easting deserves its fame because on that invisible grid line, in a storm of dust, the century-long search for armored speed, sight, and initiative revealed what it had become.
You've been listening to Famous Tank Battles. These battles were never just about machines. They were about doctrine, terrain, firepower, logistics, and the hard problem of turning shock into victory. For more military history writing and books, visit militaryauthor.me. And for magazines, podcasts, and a massive archive of military photos and video, visit trackpads.com. Thanks for listening.